stay with this discussion and bring in energy expert, Professor Sampson Mamphweli. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. I didn't think we'd get here, and I argue that most of our viewers perhaps didn't think either. We went through, at the end of last year and much of last year, I think it might have been our worst load shedding year on record. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, Prof. But did we ever think we'd get to 100 days without load shedding?
Yeah, like the minister said, we thought about this, but we didn't think that it would be this soon. I spent the past 2 days with the head of Eskom Generation in Durban. We had some engagements there, and we spent a lot of time talking about the current situation of getting to 100 days without load shedding, and looking back at some of the things that were done. And I agree in terms of the maintenance program that was enabled mainly by government, making the money available to Eskom for them to be able to service their debt, and then they use their balance sheet to basically deal with the maintenance program. And if you look at the history, the recent history of the power system, you recall that when Minister Ramkuba came on board, we were sitting at the energy availability factor of about 41%, with very high levels of breakdowns. And we're now sitting at a very low or manageable kind of breakdowns, because the energy availability factor has moved to above 60% in a very short space of time. And Eskom is able to maintain it at that particular level, and sometimes it even goes to above 70%, which talks to the fact about reliability maintenance. And I'm one of the many people who have always been skeptical, about being optimistic around the fact that the end of load shedding could be near. But having looked at the current situation, having engaged the head of Eskom Generation, and looking at the data that we analyze on a day-to-day basis that we share with Eskom and all that, and the data that is showing the new generation capacity that could be coming on board, like the minister indicated, more than 2,000 megawatts that could come on board before the end of this month, this year basically. If we aggregate all that, we might see the end of load shedding quite sooner than what we expected.
Yeah, and I mean, when we come into the winter months, that's always our concern, as it is when we come into the summer months and we see more use of air conditioning units and the like. But we're in the winter months, and Eskom says even unplanned outages are well below what was forecast for winter.
That is correct. So Eskom's forecast was about a 2,000 megawatts shortage when we hit the winter month. We haven't seen that kind of shortage because of a number of things. One is the fact that we have reliability maintenance. So the systems that are maintained, when they come back to service, they stay without breaking down. So the number of breakdowns have gone down drastically. The second aspect is that the demand has not yet reached the peak that we normally see during the other winter months. But that is negated by the fact that Eskom has not been using a lot of diesel during this time, which basically means that once we hit 34,000, 35,000 megawatts, all that Eskom needs to do is to ramp up the use of diesel for them to be able to deal with load shedding. But we're not there yet, because we are sitting in a situation where the diesel usage is very low compared to the same period sometime last year. Mm-hmm. We have the benefit of the renewable energy side of things. So in two forms. One is the fact that we have the more than 6 gigawatts, close to 7 gigawatts of renewable energy coming in through the government procurement process, the REAP program, where government procured some of this renewable energy that is now feeding into the grid. At any point in time, we've got about 2,000 to 2,500 megawatts coming from that particular program, assisting us in terms of dealing with load shedding. The second aspect is that we've seen the ramping up of small-scale embedded generation at households and businesses. It has ramped up to about 6 gigawatts as well. And that helps Eskom because during the day when the sun is shining, we get a bit of a relief, and they can then use some of the megawatts that they get relieved from the grid to generate reserves in the form of their pumped storage for later in the evening. Yes, we are expecting that when we move towards summer, when people start to use their air cons, when the power system itself on the cold side of things start to feel some heat, there might be a bit more breakdowns. But with the new generation capacity that may come online, we might have very little or no load shedding at all.
So when Eskom tells us about an improvement in its generation and financial performance, Professor Mamphweli, what does that look like?
So on the financial performance, they have saved a lot on the diesel spend. Because that was one of the areas where they spent a lot of money. They've improved their operational efficiencies. And once you improve your operational efficiencies, you save a lot in terms of money. So we expect that when they release their finances during this period, the current financial year, they might post a very positive kind of figure, something maybe in the region of above 8 billion rand on the positive side of things. And coupled to that is the fact that they are now using their balance sheet to fix the coal fleet, which basically means that they're using government money to pay the Eskom, the debt that they have accumulated. The only gray area or the area of concern is the debt that with the municipalities. The last time I checked, that debt was sitting at about 80 billion rands. And if municipalities can pay that money, it will further strengthen Eskom in terms of having liquid cash that they can use for further maintenance of their coal fleet, and also to improve various efficiencies in their operations, which can then lead to a much better financial outlook going forward, which is one of the things that is needed. Your main utility needs to be seen to be financially healthy out there in the markets, so that the market can then respond positively in terms of bringing in foreign direct investment. Because if the Eskom balance sheet does not look healthy, it creates some form of risks that the markets then pick up, and then we end up having challenges in terms of investments into the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ability for small businesses to thrive, right? You've mentioned the issue of maintenance a number of times in your answer, Professor Mamphweli. Maintenance has been one of the sticking points for Eskom in the years since load shedding began. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, the appointment of the electricity minister in March of last year, I think there was a bit of criticism around his appointment. There's a bit of, what about his appointment will actually improve the grid? But by all accounts, it does seem to have helped.
Yeah, so I'm one of those people who praised the president for two things. One, him going on a wider consultation process, consulting all stakeholders in the energy sector for the first time in the history of load shedding in South Africa, and then coming up with what he termed the Energy Action Plan. That was a brilliant move in him trying to deal with the problem. The second aspect was the appointment of the electricity minister, where we saw somebody whose job was basically to wake up in the morning and go to Eskom and deal with load shedding at ministerial level. At the beginning, there were quite a lot of gray areas in terms of his powers, in terms of his role. He was also himself not so sure what his role was going to be. And then he was given some powers by the minister. And we must also praise the two other ministers who were there, Minister Mantashe and Minister Gordhan, because in that kind of a situation, there would have been stumbling blocks in him dealing with the issues and also in opening up the various entities for him to work with them. In this case, instead they supported him. Minister Gordhan allowed the Minister of Electricity to work very closely with Eskom at all levels, from workers at power stations to all the way to Megawatt Park, to management and the various board subcommittees. And Minister Mantashe also allowed him to deal with issues of new generation capacity that was required. You recall that he also talked about bringing in a generator from elsewhere and all those things, which was the space where Minister Mantashe was supposed to play, but he allowed him that space, which then allowed government to basically be able to implement the energy action plan properly and bring us where we are now. The other thing that Minister Ramkhupa did, which many people don't talk about, is that he visited China before the BRICS summit. And then during the BRICS summit, there was an agreement that was signed between China and South Africa. Most solar systems, solar panels, and the various accessories, your inverters and batteries are made in China. At that particular point in time, they were very expensive. And then he went and engaged the Chinese government to say, let's bring down the cost of these systems when they come to South Africa. And the government agreed. And if you look at the cost of those systems now, they are down by almost 3 times the cost that was there before he started engaging the Chinese government. And that has led to the ramping up in terms of small-scale embedded generation at household level and businesses as well. So we credit him for that as well. His work that he did with Eskom, bringing the energy availability factor from 41% to above 60%, focusing on critical or those power stations that were giving a lot more problems. There were about 6 power stations that were identified, and he had to zoom in and focus on those particular power stations. I remember at some point when I had a discussion with him, and I was emphasizing myself as well on him to basically focus on those particular 6 power stations and deal with the problems that they had. Added to that was the fact that there was no money, no proper budget for maintenance in the past until government intervened in implementing the energy action plan for the president and made that allocation of the 256 billion rand for Eskom to service the debt, because the debt for Eskom came mainly because of the new build program and also because of the municipalities that were not paying Eskom. And also coupled to that, there was the fact that our tariffs were not cost reflective, which brings us to the fact that Eskom is now has been battling with NERSA, trying to get the cost reflective kind of of tariffs for the past 3 years or so.
Well, it's a good news story, isn't it? And we're very happy to bring our viewers, for once, a good news electricity story. Long may this 100 days of no load shedding continue. Certainly there are a number of lives and livelihoods that depend on it. Professor Sampson Mamphweli, thanks very much for joining us this afternoon.